Hello, everyone. This is Andromeda with the IWG podcast. We are the podcast of the Internationalist Workers Group, which is part of the Internationalist Communist Tendency. Like I said, my name is Andromeda, and my co-hosts here are,
Tom.
Aisha.
Hey guys.
and that's it for today. Sorry we've been away for a while. I know it's been quite some time since we have uploaded an episode. That was all the way back in November of 2022. It is currently the day is January 29th of 2023. You know, life comes at you fast. We had other things to take care of, but we're back and we plan on reintroducing the every 2 week schedule.
Yeah,
We got
the
quite the
holiday
line.
seasons can be rough, and this is like one of the side effects of us not having so-called professional revolutionaries. But looking forward to get
Yeah,
back on the ball here on our 2 week
this is what
schedule.
happens. This is what happens when you don't have a Patreon.
Unfortunately, the IWG has had to focus on various other projects at the moment.
They're too
But
busy doing boring things like writing articles about important events and analysis and things like that, instead of doing the fun things. We have quite the lineup today. It's gonna be the major overarching theme about agents of empire, the police, what role they serve in society, and how that role in society usually results in a lot of dead people of color. And so, with that, I think we should transition to our first topic, which is the murder of Tyre Nichols by Memphis City Police Department and the video that came out, and how every police union and even the police chief and FBI director, when they saw this video, they knew that there's absolutely no way to spin this in any positive way. Like, even just reading the transcripts is so horrifying that they knew there was no recourse except to fire and then arrest these guys. That this is honestly, like, for somewhat cynical reasons, because as we just mentioned, they understood that this video was so disgusting that there was no way to frame this positively. And we want to talk about that. We want to talk about his murder. We want to talk about how the police are essentially incentivized because they are the agents of the state, and because the state wants to do everything in its power to disincentivize any action against it. And in order to disincentivize action against it, they do that by hiring the most bloodthirsty people that they can find. And that usually just ends up in a lot of people who don't deserve to die just getting killed, most often with very little repercussions. So does anyone have any comments?
I just wanted to say, like, the fact that they arrested the cops, before the body cam footage was released, just showed, like, how brutal it was, and like, I, for one, refuse to watch it because I know it's going to be gory, and I personally can't handle that
Yeah,
sort of thing. But
I can't ever watch those videos. I have to just read what happens. Like, even audio of it, it just disgusts me so much.
yeah, same here.
Like, because of my profession, I'm pretty desensitized to horrible trauma. And just reading the descriptions of this video prior to its release, I had zero inclination towards watching that and subjecting myself to that. Like, there's nothing to be gained from it. The descriptions alone are just so horrific. And
Yeah.
I've seen some outtakes of the camera on the light pole. And I've heard some of the audio, and that was more than enough. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's gross. And honestly, the fact that they knew this and arrested the police officers just shows that it was a strategic move on their part, because they know that the public won't let them get away with not.
They mobilized riot control prior to the video being released as well in Memphis. So, make of that what you will about how fucking awful this video is. I like, we don't really have an outline for this, but because we're going to assume that people are somewhat familiar with this. But long story short, Tyre Nichols on January 10th was pulled over by Memphis PD, and even like the descriptions I read of it don't really understand what happened, and part of that is because like people didn't have body cam or video footage of it for a while. But long story short, uh, 5 Memphis City police officers just start beating the fucking living hell out of this guy, and he eventually does like get out of their grasp and he runs away, which usually like police defenders would be like, oh, he shouldn't have run away. But like, I don't know, if you're getting beat up by 5 guys with no probable cause, that flight or fight, what, you're gonna fight some cops? No, flight is the only natural instinct you would have left. And when they caught him, they just continued to beat on this guy in just the most grotesque, like it was almost like a game for them. Like they would sit him up and they would kick him in the face, and then they would bring him back up and then they would punch him in the face. And they beat him so blue that by the time that they were getting him into their cop car, he was limping and leaning on other officers. And when they put him in, they were all joking and chuckling to themselves like the fucking monsters that they are, about like, oh, I kicked his ass. I was hitting him with haymakers. Haha. And they were all laughing, and he gets sent to the hospital, and 3 days later he dies due to just massive bleeding issues. If you couldn't tell, it's a little difficult for me to just like recount these events because they are just so horrific. But that's the long story short. If you want more information on that, there are several transcripts and like outlines of the timeline of events. But I don't feel like we need to continue discussing the actual incident here. I think it's best if we move on to the bigger picture of this, which is, why is it that it seems like every fucking police department in this country has a not insignificant amount of bloodthirsty monsters who seem to take active enjoyment in beating people to death?
It's honestly evil. Like it just goes to show, like, these people, like they're not even people. Like these fucking pigs, like they lack empathy for anyone, really. And they're just basically like using their position of power as a way to like exert authority and like violence over innocent people. And it really just goes to show that, like, when you sign up for a job that essentially entails that you will do anything to defend capital and private property, and essentially it's just the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, like that's what the police are there for.
It incentivizes you to be a monster.
Anything to defend their interests and the interests of the ruling class.
It's the same reason why, and this is kind of like just going broader into Agents of Empire, the art of quote unquote killology that is taught in the military post Vietnam and now taught to police departments, which is like, if you're an agent of the state, your job is to defend the state from anyone who wishes to push back against it. And so if that is your job, and if you're like the state, why would you want someone merciful? Why would you want someone who has a conscience? Why would you want someone who is willing to let things slide? You don't. You want these people to be as cruel as possible. You want the consequences for doing the most minor infractions against it to just be met with total, absolute beastly force. And so in that way, this stuff is always going to happen. As long as there is a police department, it's always going to happen. As long as there is a military, there's always going to be some guy who's making like a necklace of ears that he cuts off of people, because they want that to happen. they're incentivized for that to happen. And I know we didn't really talk about this before, but there was an article I read about accusations of drug and human trafficking from special forces units in Fort Benning. And one of the responses I read from that, which was from this guy who basically said, well, they're doing this because they're bored. Which, like, the dark implication of that is that, oh, they're supposed to be doing that overseas. This is how they spread terror overseas, but now they're at home and they haven't lost that bloodthirst, so now they're just going to do it here. Because that's what we want them to do. We want them to make people scared. It's just like, it's a lot. And maybe now we should transition more into like narratives surrounding this issue. And this is a fairly unique instance in that this was a black man, Tyre Nichols, who was killed by a group of black police officers. Every one of them was a black officer.
I do think there's there's a little more like material analysis that we can like look at.
Though. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get more into with the way to frame things.
So these cops are part of a Scorpion unit, which like very clearly just the name is designed to be intimidating, and is like a byproduct of modern militarized policing, which was a unit in the Memphis
like stop
Police.
Crime, something in our neighborhoods. They really wanted it to just be Scorpion.
Yeah, it was street crimes operation to restore peace in our neighborhoods, and yeah, they clearly wanted it to be Scorpion.
They want to be special forces so bad, every single one of them.
And you know, like when you read through the cop speak on that name, like what I see there is like in translation, terrorize the working class in their own neighborhoods. Like this is the type of unit like utilized in a lot of cities, kind of like a vice squad has been used in the past, specifically to target like the most oppressed segments of the working class in their own neighborhoods, so they always know the score. They always know like who's in control. And like apparently all of this was triggered by like third-party reports of reckless driving the day before. Like that's really keeping the city streets safe, murdering a man over reports from the day before while he's minding his own business. But like the Memphis police moved really quickly to disband them and distance themselves from them, as if they didn't create this problem immediately.
Like 2 days ago, they just disbanded this entire unit that they spent all this money on because they realized how fucking bad it looks now.
Yeah.
But like goes to show you, like, oh, this must have been a really fucking important unit. You can just get rid of it after 5 of your guys just like kill a man for no reason.
It's literally.
It must have been real. A lot of debate had to go for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like to add on to what you're saying, it's a strategic decision on their part. They're essentially being like, oh, we're not as bad as them. Like we have morals. Like,
yeah, it was a bad unit. It was a barrel of bad apples within the police department warehouse.
Yeah, they want to separate themselves from it rather than acting like, like acting as if it was like a few individual bad cops rather than the entire.
Bad cops who were given their own unit and a fuck ton of police funding. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I see what you're doing. This shit makes me just so mad because every time I think about it, every time like this isn't funnily enough, all the Blue Lives Matter people have been fairly quiet about this Tyre Nichols one, except to point out, I was like, hey, they were black. There's no racism in police departments. Black cops will also kill black people for no reason, which like, yeah, that was always kind of our point. But I'm just thinking like anytime like these Blue Lives Matter people, there's like a guy stole a candy bar and he was like shot 50 times in the back of the head. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the price for stealing. It's like, you people literally believe that like in China, they are like executing people because they're Christian. Or like these are the people who will always like quote Gulag Archipelago anytime someone is like, maybe the system of capitalism is a little exploitative. And it's like, you can make those arguments for those too. It's like, oh, well, if you didn't want to get thrown into a gulag, maybe you shouldn't have like voiced opposition to Stalin. Ugh. But of course, like also like both of those are shit. But it just shows like a hypocrisy where it's like, when the people I don't like use excessive force, it's a crime against humanity. But when the guy who is getting like shot in the back of the head 50 times is like a black guy who I probably will be racist to if I ever like bumped into him, that's fine because I never really considered him a person anyway. I'm gonna avoid talking for a couple seconds.
So, like, I think, you know, like a lot of what you see with these situations, like, and I think the heavily racialized media coverage of these in the past has kind of done a disservice to this instance and to like the broader spectrum of police abuses, which are motivated by race because white supremacy is a tool used to maintain bourgeois rule over the class. But the ultimate goal of the police is to subject the working class to the like the rights of private property. Like they are the violent arm of state repression. They always have been. And they were the, like in Russia in 1917, they were literally the last arm of the state apparatus outside of the White Army, like to include the Cossacks that had that was still supporting the Tsar.
Except for that one police chief that Lenin hid out with. It was like a Bolshevik sympathizing police chief I remember reading about. But yes, go on. Sorry.
But you know, this is the role that they play in class society, and they like it gives them an easy out though, like for like closeted white supremacists to like point to this and say, well, like, look, like I can't be the only one who's already seen this dialogue. Like, look, these were black cops that killed a black man, so it's not just all about race. And
no, it's deeper than that. It's about the police.
It is indeed, and the only role that they can play in class society, which as a unit of oppression, and they will oppress the working class through any means available to them, whether that be like purely like a matter of race or whether that be socioeconomic. Our position as like the working class within a bourgeois society, like we produce and they consume. But like the only way that that can be like reinforced socially is through this like dehumanizing process where the police see the world as cops and criminals. And like, if you're not a criminal right now, it's because they haven't caught you yet. And apparently like this, you know, this has escalated to the point of
every civilian
like just
is beneath
wanton extrajudicial murder. And like speaking like from my own perspective, like in my own city that has the distinguished Albuquerque Police Department, who have been like the per capita leaders in police killings for like 20 years, more years than not. You know, like these matter, like APD, just like Memphis PD, just like LAPD, just like every other
NYPD,
police
Chicago
department
PD,
in the country.
Chicago PD, which literally
like,
had a gulag.
All
Chicago
of these,
PD that literally had a black site where they would disappear people to. You can look that up. They have like actual like real newspapers have reported upon that. So you know, shove that in the fucking face anytime like, someone wants to talk about that.
All of these police departments like have in common the that they the exploitation that they perpetuate against the class just increases the more dispossessed the elements of the class that we're looking at are. The poorer you are, the more discriminated against you are, the more you're outside of class society and its norms, the more it's like valid to like attack and dehumanize and debase you. And the more your own like continued basic human existence is like up for debate, like in these extrajudicial murders.
Yeah. Well, if audience, if you've enjoyed our discussions about the cruelties and brutality of the police, you're gonna love this next segment because we're gonna keep talking about it, but in a different instance. The next topic we're planning on transitioning to is the incidents that are going down in Atlanta and in the Stop Cop City movement, is the Protect the Forest movement. We're going to go a little bit into the background of that situation, the very shady behind closed doors dealings that the city has made with police and corporate elements to develop this massive, essentially a military boot camp for the cops. And we're going to talk about how activists, they did the right thing and they went through all the legal options and the legal system told them, fuck you. And so they decided not to give up and do, as peaceful as you can, an occupation against the deforestation of this segment, and which has ultimately led to the death of an activist by the name of Tortuguita just recently.
This has sort of been a movement that has been going on for a couple of years now, because the development for Cop City started a few years ago, and essentially the goal of Cop City is to create an actual mock city. So this would have actual construction of buildings, stores, restaurants, like essentially things that make up a fake city, entirely for the purpose of police officers to have a training center to practice shooting in. And this would entail so much destruction to the environment.
Yeah. If anyone's played any Call of Duty, imagine a real life Nuketown multiplayer map, but for the cops and for the purpose of like learning how to better suppress like a hunger strike.
So there's already cops who practice shooting in the forest, and the environmental impact of this is pretty catastrophic in the long term. So as of right now, there is lead poisoning in the creek from the Atlanta from the Atlanta Police Foundation's firing range, and there's been no media coverage on that. The police don't clean up the bullet casings after, shooting, like after a night of like after a whole like training session of shooting at the firing range. They don't clean up after themselves, and they're polluting the environment around them, and this is destroying like the habitat for like the the animals that live in the forest. And not only is it like so destructive in that regard, building Cop City will require so much deforestation, and given like where we are like in climate change, like this is going to make it worse. Essentially, the cops, they want more land to build this development, and the South River forest is essentially under threat because of the Black Hall expansion and the police training facility. So
Black Hall is that's like a movie studio that's also trying to push into like this forested area as well.
Yeah, Black Hall Studios. They are based in Atlanta, and they want to create like a Hollywood studio type thing, and this would have like a lot of this has massive consequences for the environment as well, because of the additional deforestation that building this studio would entail. And it's so much destruction for profit, and it's completely unnecessary to build. Like, they have other locations for the studio. There's no reason for them to build it in a forest. There's plenty of other land that they can build on.
Well, and like this land in particular too, like in addition to the environmental impacts, is like surrounded by like kind of semi-suburban, like lower cost housing. But like these people tried to move somewhere to like get their families away from like all the problems of like urban life, like, and they find themselves instead surrounded by and like constantly reminded of them in the form of a militarized police force doing live fire shooting drills in their literal backyard. like you might as well live in a war zone. And like all of this is steps away from a school, and Atlanta PD is like shooting into buildings.
Yeah, it's crazy because they really want to build a mock city to practice urban tactical warfare. Like that's crazy.
Well,
Also,
I'm just a little confused. When we say like build a city, are we referring to like a city block, or are we referring to like how big do we know the actual proposed? Because I read reports that it was more like a mock town, but like city to me implies like concrete buildings and stuff like that.
well,
I'm just a little confused.
well, it
We know
would
it's
be
massive.
a town or like technically like a village or town, basically. It wouldn't be like as big as a city, but like, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do.
But yeah,
I was just
it's supposed
confused
to have
about
like
like the actual
apartment
scale.
buildings and restaurants and like everything that the cops need to simulate killing the working class
Urban
in their
assault.
places of business and homes. Like it sounds like pretty substantial. It's supposed to be 55 acres, I believe, of the 200 acres of land that they're using
Okay,
to
yeah, that's
develop
pretty
this mock city.
substantial. That's pretty hefty. Like an acre alone, that's a fairly hefty bit of land.
Yeah, like imagine the environmental impact it'll have. And like to add on to that, like the fact of like the forest being there, it's such an important thing that they have a space that can surge with water. And essentially the forest in Atlanta is one of the biggest watersheds. And so what happens is the ground absorbs water. And when the ground is filled with concrete and cement, which is what will happen if
Yeah,
we build this fake city,
that's why
fake town.
LA flooded.
Yeah. So the water
Because
can
yeah,
no longer be absorbed into the ground.
God, we really do just love digging our own grave, like as a species.
Yeah. And
Like
in
we
addition,
encourage the process of water rising and for heavier and heavier rainfalls when they do happen. And we're like, what if we built entire like spaces of land that literally just cannot absorb this water?
Well,
well,
it's not intrinsic to humanity. It's intrinsic to the bourgeois class that
I was
can't see past the next quarterly profit cycle.
Yeah, I
I
know
was
that was a
gonna
little
say the
unfair.
same exact thing. I was gonna say the same exact thing that this is not really like
Yeah, I did not
us.
build the
Like
concrete
the
jungle.
working class is not really like at fault for the state of the environment and the likelihood of total environmental catastrophe. That's due to the bourgeoisie. And like there's literally evidence for this, as you can see by like carbon emissions increasing during like the industrial revolution, during the rise of capitalism. This just goes to show that like a mode of production based on profit and cap capital accumulation leads to a road of destruction, and it will lead to the destruction of humanity as well if we don't stop it before it's too late.
And just to make sure, like, nobody involved in this program, like, gets off the hook on this one. Like, when we say that this is a bourgeois initiative, like, this is Atlanta police, like, militarizing
Atlanta City.
within the Atlanta metropolitan area to kill the working class within it in defense of these bourgeois institutions. And the money that was raised to make this happen came from
Cox
came from
Enterprises.
leadership of UPS, Wells Fargo, Home Depot, Equifax, Delta Airlines, and everybody's favorite bigot chicken, Chick-fil-A. Like millions of dollars donated by these corporate entities to do this, like to create this cop city to further militarize the police. And like, why would those corporate entities be interested in that? Except that the police are literally like the paramilitary, like armed wing of their class war or their class rule. And like they do the dirty work of class warfare perpetuated against us.
Yeah. I think we should, because we should somewhat move on to the next topic. topic somewhat soon. So let's talk about the actual activist defense of
Sorry,
the.
I had Andromeda, sorry, I had one more thing to say, like really quick,
Oh,
just
okay,
quick
no
summary.
problem.
In addition to that, there's also like the need for clean air, and this project will increase the air pollution as well as the water pollution and ground pollution. So all these ways it's destructive to the environment. And this also like affects like, you know, the entire ecosystem, like the animals living in that environment. The empty tear gas canisters and the shell casings that are like dumped in the creek, like these are not being cleaned up. And all of this will like increase with like the building of Cop City. And there's going to be more pollution as a result of the new training facility. And they are essentially building this Cop City instead of restoring their old training facility for the reason that the sinks don't work. That's literally something that can be like fixed. Like,
Oh my god,
I know, right?
that is just a total excuse, by the way. Like, it has
Exactly.
to be something more than just they just want this facility. That's really it. Like, it's not because the sinks don't work. It's because they want the facility.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
Yeah.
so activists try to go through the legal route. By the way, this entire thing was shady from the start. They had an advisory committee that had absolutely no one from environmental groups represented in it, and they had several representatives from the police and fire department unions in it. So, you know, and also they had one vocal critic of the facility on the advisory committee, and he was booted out. So, you know, make of all that what you will. Activists exhausted their legal options, and you know, other than just give up the struggle, what do you do? But you start to do, you know, legally gray or illegal opposition to this facility, and they have done that through occupying the forest as much as they can.
Yeah, there have been several things that have happened since the original development began. So like began being planned. So right now the National Guard is in Atlanta. And there's been a chain of events that have happened since the course of the past 2 months. So in December 13th, there was an interagency raid in which 6 people were charged with domestic terrorism. These people were not doing anything besides being in the forest. So essentially, the advisory committees saying things like protesters are stealing cars, forest defenders are storing gasoline, they're shooting ball bearings at contractors, they're making bombs, attacking paramedics, and finally, protesters tried to burn a man alive. These are basically lies that they're using to discredit the people who are protesting the construction of Cop City and Black Hall's development. They really are clutching at straws to try to make them seem like the bad guys, like they're resorting to lying about what they actually did. So after that, in January 18th, an interagency raid occurred, and Tortuguita, an environmental activist, was shot by the Georgia State Police. And this is significant because it's been a while since like an environmentalist has been killed by the police.
Shot on U.S. soil.
Yeah, in the US. So like this was clearly unjustified, and like
Police justification is that like, oh, Tortuguita shot first, and very curiously, they have refused to release any body cam footage of the incident.
yeah,
It is known that Tortuguita had a gun that was legally purchased, and they had the legal requirements to carry it with them.
yeah, that's they're right.
But and it's a matter, but it is a matter of who shot first. That's the real question we're asking. And, their reluctance to release body cam footage of the incident kind of makes me feel like, oh, they shot first and Tortuguita shot in defense.
Yeah, I agree. And like it's clearly like deliberate.
Yeah.
And to like continue on what occurred on January 20th, there was a riot in Atlanta. The bank and cop union is vandalized, and now 20 people are currently charged with domestic terrorism.
Yeah, these charges are total bullshit. And when we were before recording, we kind of were talking about like, if this can be classified, like, how do you even classify terrorism? Because when we think of terrorism, the whole point of terrorism is that you are, terrorizing the public, like you're committing an act of violence indiscriminately against the public. There is no public here. It is the cops who are there. That's not what
and
terrorism is.
the state knows that the charges are legally murky, but they're also intimidating, and I think that was the real motivation here.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just thinking more like trying to argue this with someone, or like a lawyer in court could go just like, how do you do if you do a terrorism in a forest and no one's around to hear it, did it really happen? I was trying to be clever. Never mind.
Yeah, really, all they're doing is like they are trying to stop the construction of the development. Like they're like vandalizing and like destroying like equipment, and like essentially like the cops, of course they're gonna have this response. They're the defenders of private property. They defend whatever the bourgeoisie tells them, and they are there to defend the ruling class. That's their entire purpose. So it makes perfect sense that they reacted the way they did. And this just goes to show like what's been going on in Cop City, and like the developments, like all this has gone on for a while. There hasn't been as much media coverage on like many things involving it. And like the development has so much like of a disastrous effect on the surrounding environment and the community around it. The neighborhood that surrounds the area is right outside. Like the neighborhood that's right outside is a low income Black working class neighborhood, and they're going to be the ones affected by this construction the most, in addition to the environment. Basically, there's like the effects of like if Black Hall Studios were to be built within the immediate area, the community would be displaced because Atlanta itself is a city that's within a forest. So this would increase the housing prices in that neighborhood, and this would dislocate lots of workers. Like, where are they going to go when they can no longer afford their homes? And the property is definitely going to go up in price if like a Hollywood studio is being built there, and essentially like this, like the whole deforestation that this project is going to entail, and climate change, those can both be linked to the housing crisis as well. This goes back to the wider crisis of capitalism and how the working class has to pay the price.
There's a on Twitter, there's an account called Prager University. Probably have heard of it, but they post these like epic little owns, and one of them is like, have you ever noticed that like stop global warming always translates into stop capitalism? And like, yeah, that's true. So we had intended to talk about one more topic. We intended to talk about the situation and atrocities committed by the IDF against the Palestinians within the past week. But some of us have had, something has come up, and we will be recording that at a later date. So for now, this will be the end of episode 6. My name is Andromeda. My co-hosts.
I'm Aisha, and Tom has just left.
Tom had to leave. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope you stick around for our next episode where we do intend to talk about what has been going on in Palestine and Israel. With that being said, stay strong, stay vigilant. We love you all. Good night.
Thanks for listening.